What is up? What is up, everybody? This is Dr. Andrew Kim, MD. Welcome to another episode of the Insomniacs Livestream. My name is Dr. Andrew Kim. I am your host. I am a board certified psychiatrist, and thank you again for those of you who are joining me today on the Insomniacs Livestream. So, today's topic, let's just dive right into it. Today's topic is about toxic relationships. Toxic relationships. So, if you have been in a toxic relationship, if you are currently in a toxic relationship, I would like for you guys to chime in, comment in the chat today. If you are watching this later after the live stream is done, please leave some comments. I'd like to hear about the situation you are currently in, that you have been in before, things you've learned from it, struggles with why it's hard to leave this toxic relationship. And if you stick with me, after we kind of go talk about some of the general concepts about, what a toxic relationship kind of involves, some of the warning signs that you might be in one, I'm going to dive into some history for those who want to get a little personal today about a toxic relationship that I used to be in. Okay, my first marriage. So we'll get into it in a little bit, but why don't we first, for those of you who are joining for the first time, please please subscribe, please, follow my channel. I appreciate the support. So let's first go into how do you recognize the signs of being involved in a toxic relationship, or starting to realize that a relationship that was once healthy has become toxic to some degree? Because I think that's the thing to realize, that I don't think it's necessarily the case that we all just dive into a relationship knowing it's toxic. Even a healthy or even semi-healthy relationship can actually devolve, I guess would be the way to say it, devolve into a unhealthy, toxic relationship. So sometimes it may not even start out as one that is toxic. Okay. So how do we define this term, toxic? I would say a toxic relationship is one that is unhealthy, has unhealthy dynamics, and causes you distress or harm because you're unsupported, you feel manipulated, and you feel disrespected rather constantly and persistently. Okay? Now, one might say, well, that sounds pretty abusive, and how could you not spot abuse? Now, the way that I'll kind of retort to that is, look, more just flat out overt abuse, right? Overt physical abuse, overt sexual abuse, even very overt emotional abuse. That one can be a little tougher sometimes. That's a bit easier to spot sometimes. I'm not saying it's easy all the time, but it's a bit easier to detect or identify. And by default, I would say most abusive relationships are by default toxic in nature. And here's the tricky part, though. Toxic relationships don't always involve overt abuse. And that's why sometimes it is tricky for us to even realize that we might be in one, let alone figuring out how to get out of that situation. Okay. So, what are some of the more, I guess, subtle signs? Okay. Subtle signs, common signs that you might be in one, or that this has maybe devolved into a toxic relationship. Okay. So I'd say, look, if you are noticing some of these common signs, like you are constantly giving, you're constantly feeling like you're giving, but you're not receiving. You are feeling drained and depleted as a result. So there isn't this kind of typical reciprocation, mutualism that's happening in the relationship. You're consistently feeling disrespected as a human, as an individual. You are noticing that you're just bringing out the worst in each other rather than building each other up and bringing out the best in one another. You're almost always at fault. You're almost always being blamed. Okay, so those are kind of common signs. What are some of the more kind of internal emotional cues in addition to the ones I've already listed? So some of the more kind of internalized cues that you could look inwards and try to recognize would be: you're feeling depressed, you're feeling angry, you're feeling tired, both physically and emotionally, when after interacting with that other person. You're feeling invalidated pretty constantly. You feel like there's constant tension. You feel like you're walking on eggshells rather than being able to be comfortable and vulnerable in the sanctity of, your home or the shared space that you guys have together. Your self-esteem is eroding, is kind of how I would put it. It's your self-esteem is being eroded versus being built up. Instead of having that self-confidence build up, it's going in the other direction. And I know it's kind of a popular term these days, but like you're feeling gaslit. Gaslighting seems to be a common theme. And unfortunately, self-doubt becomes very prominent in toxic relationships. I would say toxic relationships are just a breeding ground for self-doubt. Okay. So those would be the things to be on the lookout for as warning signs. So stop, pause, reflect. For those of you who are listening, are those things that are resonating with you right now, as I kind of listed those out? Is that something you've been suspicious of, that you've been realizing a little bit more? Maybe you've recognized but are in denial about, or don't want to believe that a relationship you're in has become somewhat toxic. So think about that as we continue to talk. Now, there's also different, I would say, kind of different subtypes of toxicity, right? I think all of us might have a particular image or archetype of what a toxic relationship might look like, or because of our own personal experiences, we may have been through one already, and you have kind of a sense of this is what a toxic relationship might look like, and may get caught off guard when it manifests in a different way. So what am I referring to when I'm saying subtypes of toxicity? Look, there are going to be toxic individuals in relationships that are kind of the overly controlling subtype. Okay. There are going to be those who are just kind of those like malignant narcissists. That's another variation, in my opinion. There are going to be overly dependent partners, kind of going back to that theme of, take without that reciprocation. There's going to be the constant critics. There are going to be the very overt abusers, like we talked about. Another one that's kind of caught on with some layperson lingo is kind of these energy vampires. They're just kind of draining, literally. I'm sure you can kind of, think of an image of somebody in your life that's always kind of constantly draining every time you guys spend time together or try to bond. And really, we need to stop and pause, right? I think when we talk about this concept of toxicity and toxic relationships, many folks will automatically run and jump to the conclusion that we're only talking about romantic relationships. No, it doesn't always have to be boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, significant other, partner, etc. You can have toxic dynamics and toxic relationships even in a non-romantic sense, right? You can have toxic platonic friendships. You can have toxic relationships within the family unit with relatives, parents, siblings, relatives, etc. You can have a toxic mentor. You can have a toxic supervisor, coworker, etc. Right? So toxicity isn't relegated just to romantic dynamics or romantic relationships. So keep that in mind, right? So be on the lookout, not just kind of in a romantic setting, but even in these other settings of your life. So reflect, pause, think to yourself, can you spot or recognize toxicity in these other scenarios outside of romantic relationships? Do you have any of those right now? Have you had any of those in the past, right? So how does one kind of start coping with, right, the emotional fallout? Let's say right now, as you reflected, you're maybe not in the midst of one, thank God, right? Like you don't want to be in one of these, right? And let's say that you have had one, though. You can resonate with the fact and you can relate to the fact that maybe you've been in one before. So how have you healed and recovered and moved on from being in a prior toxic relationship before? How have you done that? So for those of you who are watching, this, post live recording, let us know. Put it in the comments below. Let us know your experiences. How did you move on? How did you recognize the warning signs? How did you deal with that toxic relationship, and how did you heal and kind of move on from that? What did you learn from it? Or were there further setbacks even after you left that toxic relationship? So, some general guidance, I would say, look, there really has to be, self reflection and intentionality. Okay. You need to be intentional about surrounding yourself with health. Okay. And I know that's a very generic statement, but that's going to look different for each of you, right? I don't know that all of us have the luxury of having supportive, healthy friends, family, but for those of you who do, right? Surrounding yourself. And this is the time, if there's any time, this is the time to lean on people you trust. It's time to collect those favors and the favors you have in your back pocket. It's time to lean on your friends, the ones that you trust. It's time to lean on your family members, your supports. It's time to lean on some professional help, right? Whether that be a therapist, a counselor, a pastoral counseling through your church, a psychiatrist, whatever it may be. It's time to surround yourself with healthy routines and healthy activities. It's time to focus on even the mundane, right? The activities of daily living, treating yourself right with self-care. When we say the word self-care, a lot of social media portrays these like fluffy images of someone in a bathtub with bubbles at a spa with a towel around their head and a weird wooden tray across the bathtub, drinking wine with a charcuterie board. Give me a break. When I'm saying take care of yourself with self-care, I'm saying try to sleep healthy, focus on eating right, run your daily errands, respect yourself, get out of bed. If you are not intentional about surrounding yourself with health, it is human nature. It is human nature that we will avoid pain, we will be hedonistic, and human nature will take over. And we will fill that void, and we will fill the pain, and we will fill the regret and the guilt around being in this toxic relationship, that we're just going to fill it with unhealthiness. You might just run into another unhealthy relationship, another toxic relationship. You may try to fill that void with excitement, with taking risks, with drugs, with alcohol, with self-injury, whatever it may be, right? So there has to be an intentionality, an overt intentionality, drawing from your motivation to do these things as part of that process of kind of dealing with the emotional fallout to help you kind of move on, get out of or heal from a toxic relationship. So one of the other things would be just that self-reflection I talked about, right? Acknowledging your pain. If you don't acknowledge your pain, how else can you start healing, right? I mean, there has to be an acknowledgement that there is pain there, that there are wounds to be healed to even start healing, right? You have to remind yourself, though, as you're uncovering and self-reflecting and realizing the pain that you are going through, it's to really remind yourself that your emotions and the emotional roller coaster, the emotional valley that you might go through in the self-recognition, in working through this, is temporary. Your emotions don't define your self-worth. Your emotions don't define the core of who you are. You are not your emotions, right? I know that sounds a little cheesy or cliche, but that's serious. Your emotions are transient. Your emotions will ebb and flow. Your emotions may be situational. Your emotions don't define you. And it's important to keep that in mind as you work through this. Now, as you keep that in the back of your mind, it is important to understand the pain. What is that pain about? Is the pain that you are feeling, is it about loneliness and the fear of being alone? Is it about the low self-worth and that self-deprecation? Is it that fantasy that is shattered? The fantasy that is shattered of what could have been, what should have been, what you wanted so badly for this relationship to be, and the realization it's a far cry from what you wanted. It's a far cry from a loving relationship, a nurturing and healthy relationship. And it's just the pain that fantasy has now been shattered, that hope. Let's use the word hope to replace the word fantasy to make this relatable. The hope has been shattered. The fantasy has been shattered. And that's painful. Let's be real, right? That is painful. And then that evokes a fear and an anxiety about trying again. It's like, how can I make myself vulnerable again? How can I trust again after I just got burned so badly, I got hurt so badly, I'm in so much pain, that in itself can become an obstacle to start that momentum to just get the hell out of that toxic situation, right? So there's got to be an acknowledgement of the pain. There's got to be a reminder that your emotions are temporary, that those emotions don't define who you are, to start that healing process, and that overt intentionality of surrounding yourself with health and as much support as you can. And I know that's easier said than done. Okay. And now look, I'm going to state the obvious here, right? Even during this process, there will be a temptation. Conscious, subconscious, unconscious. There's oftentimes a temptation to reconnect with that toxic individual. And look, some out there who listen to the statement I made can get very judgy. And they might say to themselves, or say in reaction to that statement, that's ridiculous. Only a loser would want to go back to that. If that was me, I would run like crazy. I'd be 100 miles from that situation. I'd never even associate with someone like that. My response to that is, then you don't understand human nature. I'm sorry, then you don't understand human nature. And to make these condescending, judgmental statement, only someone weak or a loser would be in a situation like that. I would never be in a situation like that. I would never let someone treat me like that. Really? Really? Then I guess you can't relate to insecurity. I guess you can't relate to loneliness. I guess you can't relate to, needing and wanting something so bad. I guess you can't relate to insecurity of a low self-esteem. It's like, come on. Those are universal human struggles. Those are universal. So on some level, you should be able to relate to why individuals end up in toxic relationships sometimes. It's not that someone wants to go through this pain. It's not that someone wants to feel this trapped. It's not that someone wants to be treated this way with such disrespect. It's because of all of those fears and those insecurities that we go through as a human being, right? To me, that's very relatable. And that's why it's also understandable and relatable why there could, even in the process of getting out of one of these relationships, be a temptation to maybe even go back. Okay. So if you are in that position, so if that's resonating with you right now, of, gosh, why do I have this ambivalence? And there's a part of me that still has this, like, almost this longing or desire to maybe reconnect, talk to that person, give them another chance. I'm not encouraging, I want to be loud and clear. I'm not encouraging or saying you should entertain that idea. I'm saying it's important to try to examine and understand what need of yours was trying to be met via that toxic person. You weren't with that toxic person for fun. At some point, you were with that toxic person because you were trying to get some important need of yours filled. It wasn't maybe being filled and fulfilled in the healthiest way, but there was a need that was underlying. So what the hell is that need? That's what is important to understand. That person is not going to be the healthy fulfillment of that need. It's more important to understand and examine what is that need. And you have to separate out those two concepts. So start there. So if you are in that position and that resonates with you, that I still feel almost this temptation to reconnect with that toxic person or somehow hope for the best, maybe in this kind of delusional denial that we're going to make this so much better, examine the need. What is the underlying need that I'm trying to get met through this individual? Okay, so that's my tip for that. And then let's end with the following, and then we'll talk about some anecdotes of things that I've gone through. Is how do you also, as part of that moving forward, quote unquote, moving forward process, how do you heal the relationship with yourself, right? Not to sound cheesy, I'm serious. Like, how do you heal that relationship with yourself? So many patients who I've worked with, right? Even after they get out of this toxic scenario, especially in the early stages, and sometimes even far down the road, are still being so harsh on themselves, right? They're playing into some of those stereotypes I mentioned earlier, kind of where I got a little bit heated. It's like, how could I have been so stupid? how could I have been so weak? Feeling so embarrassed, feeling shame, feeling guilt, just kind of a spiral of this negativity, right? And finding it difficult to exhibit and practice grace and self compassion as a result. When you're in a spiral of self blame, shame, guilt, embarrassment, it's hard to make room for compassion and grace for yourself. Look, the reality is it's not a cop out. It's just life, and it's kind of the randomness and chaos of life. Bad things happen to good people every day in life. Bad things happen to decent, good-natured, kind human beings. It is what it is, okay? How can you make room to display some grace and self-compassion for yourself? Easier said than done, right? So, look, I know it's not the same thing, but I make an analogy sometimes that it's okay to almost go through a grieving process, right? It's okay, especially in the early stages, to almost grieve or mourn the fact that that relationship has come to an end. And again, I know I'm going to get some criticism. People are going to say, well, why would you be grieving and mourning a unhealthy situation or a toxic individual? I didn't say you should, revel and fantasize about the wonders of how great that toxic person was. No, it's normal, in my opinion, to maybe miss certain aspects of that relationship. Because look, I said it in the beginning, if you're watching from the beginning, there may actually have been good times. There may actually have been aspects of the relationship or that individual you respected or you enjoyed. There were some positives, right? It's not necessarily like in life that it's 100% binary. They were all good, all bad, all unhealthy, all healthy. There was obviously something. There was something probably that attracted you to that individual at some point, whether it was, we were able to connect on some level. We could talk easy. I felt comfortable with them. They spent time with me. Whatever it was, there was obviously certain aspects of the relationship, of what the relationship itself represented, or that individual themselves, you know, that was attractive to you, right? So is it normal to miss maybe certain aspects of that relationship or certain aspects of that person? Sure, absolutely. Absolutely, right? So, and again, it's almost also the loss of the fantasy of what could have been, of what you were hoping that relationship might evolve to. So there is also a shattering of that fantasy that requires some mourning and grieving as well, right? So look, it is okay if you are feeling some of almost kind of that ambivalence, right? And missing and thinking about certain aspects of that person or that relationship. So I think that's kind of unsettling to say out loud for some individuals, right? They'll say, "Oh my, I can't say that. What's wrong with me?" A normal person wouldn't say that, long for that, think about it. Why am I even reminiscing about that? And that's what can also feed into this guilt and the shame and the embarrassment I'm talking about. Not even just the perception of what others are thinking about you, of just even how you're judging yourself when it comes to these subtleties, right? So even this portion, right? This portion of early recovery or exit from a toxic situation might require you to show yourself some self compassion and grace for yourself. Okay. So, look, bottom line for this segment, it's approach looking at the past and examining the situation, the relationship, the person from a stance of curiosity. And remind yourself that this reflection, this curiosity in itself is an act of self compassion. You are trying to learn, you are trying to understand yourself. You're not necessarily revisiting memory lane for fun. You're doing it to learn more about you, learn from your experience, and hopefully commit yourself to a healthier relationship the next time around. So look at the past from a stance of curiosity and remind yourself that the act of curiosity is a reflection of self compassion. Okay. So, all right. So, look, is this me, right? as a mental health clinician? Is this me just giving you a bunch of fluff, right? Memorizing a bunch of bullet points from textbooks and vlogs and blogs that I've watched about toxic relationships, healthy relationships? No, this really hits home and is personal to me, right? I work with a lot of college students right now at my current job. I work in telehealth. I work with students at, undergrad, grad school, people who've returned to school later in midlife. So, typically 18 to, I would say, mid 30-year-olds. That's kind of the demographic I'm working with, right? And there's this kind of interesting phenomenon. I don't really speak out loud or really overshare with my patients that, oh, I wouldn't get it. Oh, I don't understand because I'm, somehow this psychiatrist who's promoting health and wellness and talking about communication and healthy relationships, et cetera, that somehow I'm not going to be able to relate to this concept of toxicity. And I'm just kind of coming from this, condescending pillar of like, oh, like, how could you be in such an unhealthy situation? Do something about it. No, look, this concept of toxic relationships is something that really hits home to me. Right now, I am married. I have a wonderful wife, wonderful 9-year-old boy. I'm very fortunate, very blessed. But this is my second marriage. This is my second marriage. I've been married in the past, got divorced, and look, the next few minutes here, I'm not doing this to bash my ex-wife. I'm not trying to be purposely demeaning or disrespectful, but yeah, it was not a healthy relationship for the two of us. It really wasn't. Um, and interestingly, here, right, I think there were numerous red flags, even from the beginning, right? This now dates back to, oh gosh, now I'm dating myself. I'm 42 years old. Let's see. This was back now, about 17 years ago at this point. So a while ago. Maybe even 18 years ago when we decided to date each other. We originally were friends for several years. We had mutual friends in a social circle of friends. And look, I had just gotten out of a relationship. She was out of a recent relationship. And it was almost more of this kind of like, well, let's see what happens. And let's go out. Let's see if anything happens. We know each other. We spend a lot of time together. We have mutual friends. We get along. So it's like, let's just go out. And even early on, in the dating stages, I think it was pretty clear to both of us that, we were probably better off being friends than, romantic partners. But look, I think at that stage of our life, I think of our lives, both of us were rather insecure. You know, I, one for an outsider looking in might say, well, what do you mean? Like, you're on this pathway, you're academically successful, you're, wrapping up med school, you got this future ahead of you. Yeah, all those things don't equate to security, and not being insecure. And, my social life, romantic life, dating, that was an area that I was always kind of just insecure about growing up. And in my mind, I'm like, well, there's kind of this comfort, right? This is someone I know. This is someone I know who seems to have interest in me. There's almost a security there because we've been friends, we hang out. And it was almost more like a safety zone, right? Almost like not wanting to take the risk. And there was a part of me that knew we were not a good fit, beyond maybe being platonic friends. Yet there was almost this fear and anxiety, right? That like, well, like, this is, I don't want to be alone. This is someone who's interested in me. It feels nice that someone's interested in me. But uh, there were red flags, when we were going out. I mean, there were issues between the two of us. I recognized pretty early on, even in our dating, our short time of dating, that there were mental health issues with her. There was excessive partying, excessive drinking. Our value systems didn't really totally align. And, for whatever reason, right? We were just kind of almost reflexively, defensively trying to defy the odds, we were being told by other people too, like this doesn't even seem like a good match. And we're almost like in a reflexive defensive manner, just saying like, we're going to make this work. Right. And we ended up getting married, and very quickly, very quickly, after the marriage, very clear that, the fact that our values were very misaligned, we weren't even on the same page about life goals. Um, it just spiraled very quickly, even within the I would say, first few months of our marriage. And just all of our, fears kind of came to fruition that, this is just probably something we shouldn't have done. And I want to be respectful, but it's just, yeah, some of the signs that we reviewed earlier, they came true. I was drained and just tired, and I felt this like was a very one-sided, non-mutual relationship where I'm finding myself, begging and begging and begging, for my wife at the time to try to focus on getting healthy. There were issues with depression, deep-seated insecurities. Rampant, excessive, substance use problems, self-injury, eating problems, severe eating problems, eating disorder problems. And I'm sitting there training to become a psychiatrist, right? I'm in the midst of psychiatry residency. So this is right after med school. So after med school, you do 4 years of specialized training. You are a physician, but you're working under other physicians being supervised. And you're working like 90 hours a week at the hospital. So very busy. So on top of that, that didn't help. Being totally drained, being a zombie, having nothing, feeling depleted physically, mentally, emotionally in the midst of these kind of problems. And yeah, I kind of what I defined earlier, it was kind of this sense of, take, 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 take. And it wasn't just about take. Like, I'm not trying to be unfair. It was also, we just weren't aligned with our goals, where I'm finding myself saying, I'm more urgently worried and prioritizing your health than you are. And it's just, at a certain point, got exhausting. We're like, why am I the one who's trying to take ownership of your actions, your motivation to be healthy, etc.? But there was also a part of me that's like almost guilt-ridden, right? Absolutely guilt-ridden. Here I am, I'm the firstborn child, firstborn male, oldest male in a Korean American family. Oldest son is supposed to have a lot of responsibility of the duty, being provider, being the protector. I'm the oldest of 2 brothers, so I'm used to being kind of in that older sibling mentality. I'm supposed to have a strong work ethic. I'm supposed to be able to problem solve everything. We grew up in a Christian household, so in addition to the cultural aspect of the Korean values, it's like, in a Christian household, right? Divorce is not something we should be talking about, right? So it's, you got to figure it out. You got to show unconditional love. You got to pray. You got to look to God. You have to figure it out, make it work. You shouldn't be contemplating divorce, right? So it was like out of sight, out of mind, even though I was miserable, unhappy, tired, drained. I felt disrespected. I felt devalued. I felt gaslit over and over before the term even really existed. And it hit a boiling point, right? And, it really got to the point where we just did not see eye to eye. And it almost became a defiant, overt. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't me inferring. We had overt conversations where my ex-wife basically said at the time when we were married, this is how it's going to be. And if you're expecting me to change, and if you're expecting, me to do all those healthy things that you're wanting from me, like, that's not where I'm at. And it's not going to get better. So take me as I am. Right. And so, she even gave me overt fair warnings. And this is me now in delusional la la land saying, well, no, just being said out of anger. It's the disorders and the issues that are talking. That's not really her. Got to stick it through. Got to stick it through. I can't fail as a husband. I can't fail and come to the realization everyone was right. My parents were right. My friends warned me. I got to prove them wrong, right? All these internal swirlings of thoughts, right? Convincing myself I have to make this work. Can't be a bad Christian, can't be a bad husband, can't, et cetera, et cetera. How can I? I'm going to be a psychiatrist. How am I going to be a psychiatrist and help my patients when I can't even help my wife? I can't help my wife overcome depression. I can't help my wife overcome substance use issues. I can't help my wife get through hopelessness and suicidality, self-injury. I'm a failure. I'm a total failure. How am I going to even help other people? I can't even help my own spouse. I'm an utter failure. These are the things that are going through my mind. And and it really took, it really, really, really took. Hi, Dita. Thanks for joining. How do you get over someone? Yeah, no, that's not easy. I don't know if you were here in the earlier segment, but part of that is you almost have to think of it as a healing process, almost kind of like a grieving and mourning process. And that's kind of what we talked about earlier. So if you missed some of that, I recommend when we wrap up here, this will be uploaded, and you can watch the recording to go back. And in brief summary, I think it takes, like I said before, it takes some self-reflection. I think it takes intentional actions to surround yourself with health. And I do think there's a little bit of a grieving and mourning process that you have to allow yourself to go through. And I kind of talked about some of the nuances of that earlier, because I think people get confused sometimes of like, why should you grieve or mourn some relationship that was unhealthy or toxic? But I tried to go into some subtleties of why that still is important. So hopefully, to get back to the topic we were talking about here, I'd recommend you go back and watch some of what we were talking about earlier. But thank you for joining. So, and sounds like there's still, maybe some mourning and grief and healing that you may be needing to go through, it's sounding like. So, and unfortunately, right, this isn't how it always has to play out for everyone out there who's in these like very difficult toxic relationships. But for me, unfortunately, it took things to hit rock bottom. It really did. Okay. There were arrests involved, jail time spent. Again, I don't want to get into all the dirty laundry, but like legal issues multiple times related to drinking, showing up to work drunk, all these different things that were happening with my ex. Disrespect, infidelity, giving chances over and over again. I lost count, millions of chances of like, I'm going to try. And then me feeling the guilt. How can I not stay when the person I'm with, my spouse, is saying, I'm going to try my best, knowing with mental health issues underneath it all, people want to be healthy, right? So it's just like, how can I abandon them when they're saying they're going to try, but that all their actions and all of their behavior say otherwise, right? And then it took a culmination of numerous legal problems, lack of faithfulness, almost, kind of a spitting in the face with overt F you, I'm going to keep doing these behaviors tenfold now to show you, and you're stuck with me regardless. It took all that, where in the middle of a trip where we were at one of her cousins or relatives, weddings, when we're abroad, I lost it. I had a total breakdown. I ended up flying home by myself back to the Boston area, leaving her saying, we're done, packing things, literally into 1 or 2 duffel bags, literally going to one of my co-residents who is my friend during residency. His name's Jeremy, and Jeremy somehow randomly, if you ever run across this video, I'm still totally indebted to you for being there for me as a best friend during residency. Asking him, I said, I don't even know what to do, Jeremy. I said, I'm leaving my wife. Can I crash at your place for who knows how long? And, like I said, that's what I mean. Hopefully it doesn't have to be at the point of desperation like that, but leaning on others. And I was very blessed and fortunate that my co-resident and buddy at the time, Jeremy, just said, yeah, just here's a spare room. Bring your stuff. We'll figure it out later. He didn't sit there saying, well, how are we going to split the rent or, et cetera, et cetera. He said, come in. I'm here for you. Right. And I had to figure it out day by day. And I was very fortunate. I was very fortunate that my friend was there. Right. Even in that, right, I said, let's go over some of the topics we talked about earlier. Right. There's still going to be a recovery process. Just because I said, hey, we're separating, I'm filing for divorce, that wasn't the end of it. I had a breakdown at work. I'm training to be a psychiatrist. I had a total breakdown in the break room, in the back room of the nursing station at the inpatient unit. I'm there rounding on patients, trying to help patients in the middle of residency, had a total breakdown. And again, thank God, one of my co-chief residents, Dr. Yoder, was there to say, what the hell's going on? Imploring that I go get some help. Luckily, I had a mentor who was very understanding, talked to me, got a recommendation to see a therapist. I'm a psychiatrist, and I was so stubborn. I don't want to go see a therapist. I'm training at Harvard. I'm a Harvard-trained psychiatrist. What's a therapist going to teach me? Like, this is going to be a waste of my time. This is so underneath me. This is so embarrassing. Why do I need someone's help over marital problems? But it got horrible. It got horrible where prior to this, even before the, actual filing of divorce, I mean, I got so depressed because I felt so trapped. I felt suicidal. I don't even want to go into explicitness about that. Maybe one day I'll do an episode about that of, how close it got for me to do something stupid. I mean, that's for me, that was kind of a rock bottom that I hit. But luckily, I was very fortunate that I had people around me, not everyone does, who were supportive of me, asked me to go get help, swallowed my pride to go start seeing a therapist every week. It was still a long process, took close to a year to kind of go through a divorce process. And even in the midst of that, I referred to the temptation, right? The temptation sometimes of going back. And there were so many times where I got phone calls repeatedly, during that divorce process. Your wife's in the emergency room. She's begging to talk to you. Your wife's on the inpatient unit. I'm the counselor at this hospital. We're pleading and begging. Can you have a family session? She wants to see if she can reconcile. This is the police station. Your wife's saying you're the only one she can count on to bail her out. Right? And so many times it's like, well, I got to go help. Getting pulled back into this cycle. And if I were to set boundaries, God, the wave of guilt that would come through, right? The wave of guilt that would come over because I'm trying to set a healthy boundary for myself to start finalizing, separating, and breaking the cycle. Yet I'm like, well, who else can help her in this situation, right? So trust me. I understand when I'm telling you those bullet points earlier about how there's going to be temptations to keep getting drawn back into a toxic relationship. I've lived through it, guys. Okay, so it's not fluff. It's not just some bullet point. It's not some cliche from a blog. I've been there. I understand the concept of how you can keep getting pulled back and forth. And it's so hard to even extricate yourself from a overtly overtly toxic, unhealthy situation. And this is a psychiatrist, right? No, I'm not trying, I don't keep saying that to like try to put myself up like, oh, I'm above the fray. I'm just saying that more to highlight like no one is immune. No one is immune to somehow finding yourself sometimes in a toxic situation. And yeah, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. Moving on from that. So to Dita, who's, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but I had a problem, right? Trying to figure out where do I go. There was so much shame. There was so much guilt. There was so much embarrassment, especially in that first year of kind of going through that divorce, getting out of that. It's like I'm sitting there saying, people were right. My parents who said this is a huge mistake. I told them, F off, I'm going to live my life, right? I was wrong. Had a few close friends say, what the hell are you doing, man? I was wrong, right? Embarrassment, shame, embarrassing. I mean, I'm this Christian male growing up in kind of the church setting my whole life. What do you hear all the time on Sundays? Till death do us part. Respect your husband, respect your wife, don't divorce. So I failed, right? I failed as a husband. I failed as a son. Forget the religious aspect, right? Bring in the Korean cultural aspect, right? I'm kind of a shame to the family, right? How embarrassing is it that, my parents who have, respect in the community says, oh, our oldest son, right? The oldest son, right, is divorced. He married that shameful girl we told him not to, and it ended up in a messy divorce. Look what happened. Failed as a son, failed as a Christian, failed as a husband, failure as a mental health clinician, psychiatrist, can't even help my own wife. Guilt, embarrassment, shame, depression, you name it, right? Not easy. And it did. It took me working through all of those emotions and all of those feelings, swallowing pride and taking the risk to try to mend some fences, to try to repair some of the bridges I had burnt along the way, to try to look inward. God, I never want to look inward. I just want to keep moving and I want to keep doing and I want to keep accomplishing, right? But I had to pause and look inward. I did therapy for, over a year probably, straight, almost weekly, every week. Even though I'm working 80, 90 hours, carving out with intentionality an hour a week to do some self-reflection, try to do some self-reflection outside of that. And it took some time, guys. It took time. I had to reevaluate my values and what I wanted out of life, what I wanted out of a partner. And look, are there still some remnants to this day, right? I'm not going to just paint a rosy picture. Are there remnants and residual effects of going through all of that, whether it was in the marriage or things I went through internally by myself? Yeah, look, so to Dita and to others who are listening, right? I believe, when I self-reflect, I definitely ended up becoming more jaded, less trusting, more cynical. I think almost a little reluctant at times to be too vulnerable, to just kind of allow myself to have too much joy, right? So I think those are still some remnants of what I went through, right? Probably things I'd still need to reflect on at some point, for the sake of not just me, but for the sake of, my family, from my current wife or my son, that, I think there's almost kind of this mutedness sometimes I have of, getting too excited or being vulnerable enough to just kind of getting overly joyful. Because, I've been burned so bad before in life that, I think there's still some remnants of trying to keep those walls up to be overly preemptively self-protective of myself sometimes, right? So there's definitely still residual effects. So to detail, it for others, some might just quote unquote heal and move on very quickly. And look, I'm, at this point, you know, from the divorce itself, right? I'm at this point, like, what is it, 14 something, 15 something, 15 years removed at this point. And there, I do think, very bluntly, there's still some residual remnants of maybe the experiences I went through, right? So doesn't mean that that's holding me back from living my life. Doesn't mean that it's making me not feel fulfilled or that I can't experience joy and happiness. No, but I'm just saying, I do think, right? So to be clear to you too, it's not a binary, oh, because I'm not quote unquote totally over it, I can't live life. No. And that's a message of hope I want to give too, is that um, both things can coexist. There's probably some things I still need to work on, yet I am genuinely, you know, in a place where, I don't have that fear and I don't have that insecurity. I do feel like I'm living a life where I put the values of myself, my family, as kind of a priority. So if there was anything for me personally, I know it's not always going to be like this for every individual out there. If there was anything that came out of being in that very challenging, toxic relationship in the past, it did. Not to sound cliche, I came out as a much more, it took a while, probably took a couple years, but after a couple years, I became a much more self confident, less insecure individual where, if anything, I just kind of stopped caring what other people thought about me to a certain degree. I'm not immune to that. I'm not 100% secure all the time, but I would say leaps and bounds in a different place than where I was pre-marriage and pre-toxic relationship. So if anything, it was a very rapid, out of necessity learning experience where there was a lot of self-growth. In retrospect, look, I wish I could have grown like that without having gone through that painful experience and that kind of a challenging relationship in my life, but it is what it is, right? And that's part of my self-narrative. I've told it to my wife before, kind of in random anecdotes, that, like, look, I came out as a stronger person. And whether you want to call it fate or destiny, you know, however you want to label it, maybe I wouldn't be who I am had I not gone through that. Maybe I wouldn't have been in a position to have met my current wife at that point had it not been for all those things. Maybe I wouldn't have been as confident, to call her and say I'd like to go out on a date, right? Or have the confidence to say you're what I want in my life, right? And settle for someone else because of insecurity, right? So who knows? But I do believe there's maybe I'm corny and a romantic to some degree, that, yeah, fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it, things happen in life for a reason sometimes, I think. And not that I wanted to go through that, but I made the most of it at the end, right? And I think I did learn from it. So again, I know I kind of went off long-winded, but felt like, look, to kind of connect to you guys as viewers, just wanted to share a little bit, peek behind the curtain, just so you understand that when I'm talking about some of these topics, whether it's, toxic relationships, or when I'm talking about some of my other videos about depression and anxiety, it's just to let you know, look, not that I've gone through every single disorder or problem that I'm talking about in my videos, but for a lot of these things, when it comes to human insecurity, difficulties with relationships, pain from relationships, like I've been there. I've been there. Okay. And so, when I try to, do these live streams or do my more evergreen videos, like I'm trying to weave in reality and realism, when I'm talking to you guys about these topics. So I've rambled enough, but look, for those of you who've joined, for those of you who've chatted here, and maybe those of you who are listening to this, after the live stream ends on a recording, let me know. Hopefully you could see that I've been trying to be very genuine with you, just sharing about my own personal experiences with challenging toxic situations. So let me know, are you in a toxic situation? Have you been in one before? What made it challenging to get out of that? How did you recover? How did you heal? Are you still struggling with working through that right now? What have you learned from it? Any of the above, guys. I appreciate you if you want to share, comment, just for the sake of sharing and letting it out. Maybe you want to leave a pearl of wisdom for others who read your comments. But again, thank you. So thank you for listening. Thank you for joining in. I could see there's 11 concurrent viewers right now listening in. So I appreciate you guys hanging out so late. It's, oh my gosh, it's 12:30 Eastern right now. It's 11:30 almost Central Time. So appreciate you guys. You guys really are the Insomniacs. So hence the name of the show, the Insomniacs Livestream. So if you haven't already, last call, please like, please subscribe, please stay tuned. And the Insomniacs Livestream is right now consistently every Tuesday night and every Saturday night. If there's ever going to be bonus live streams, I'll keep you guys apprised and let you know. So please make sure you follow me here, follow me on X, follow me on Instagram as well, and I'll try to be more active on those platforms as well. So thank you again, guys. This is Dr. Andrew Kim. Appreciate you. Try to get some sleep, y'all. Have a good one. Thank you again, guys. Peace out.